Unaware his pregnant wife just signed a $1 billion deal, he serves her divorce papers minutes after she births twins. But he forgot to read the prenup. He didn't wait a second. He didn't wait an hour. He didn't even wait 15 minutes. 15 minutes after Dr. Sierra Mitchell gave birth to twins, her body still trembling from surgery, blood seeping through the bandages wrapped around her abdomen, hands shaking so badly she could barely hold both babies against her chest. Her husband walked into the recovery room with another woman at his side and an envelope in his hand. Donovan Mitchell, 41, real estate mogul, son of Chicago's most powerful black dynasty, wearing a suit that cost more than the nursing staff made in a month, didn't smile when he saw his children for the first time. He didn't ask if Sierra was okay. He didn't look at the twins, a boy and a girl, still red-faced and crying softly, still covered in the evidence of the violent journey they'd just made into the world. He looked straight at his wife, lying there with an IV in her arm and surgical staples holding her stomach together, and said in a voice so cold it made the room feel smaller, "You're not my wife anymore." The nurse by the monitor stopped moving. Her hand froze on the clipboard. Sierra blinked, her mind foggy from medication, trying to make sense of the words. Her lips moved, but barely any sound came out. "Donovan? What?" "I said you're done," he repeated, louder now, clearer. "This marriage is over. Sign the papers so we can both move on with our lives." He dropped the envelope onto the rolling tray beside her bed, right on top of the medical consent form she'd signed an hour ago when they'd told her the twins were in distress, that they needed to cut her open immediately or risk losing them both. Sierra tried to sit up. Pain ripped through her abdomen so sharp and sudden that she gasped, her whole body going rigid. The twins shifted against her chest, sensing her distress, their tiny faces scrunching up. "Donovan, I don't understand," her voice cracked. "I just had our babies. Don't do that," he snapped, cutting her off. "Don't make this emotional. You've always been too emotional. That's part of the problem." Behind him, Celeste Harper stood in the doorway, 29, polished, perfect, wearing ivory and gold like she'd dressed for a celebration. She wasn't trying to hide. She stood exactly where a wife should stand, close enough to touch him, close enough to claim him. Sierra's heart broke in real time. She could feel it, the actual physical sensation of something inside her chest shattering. "Why is she here?" Sierra whispered, looking past Donovan to the woman who'd been introduced as his business partner 6 months ago. The woman Sierra had asked about, worried about, cried about in the bathroom while Donovan called her paranoid and insecure. Donovan didn't answer. Celeste did. "Because this concerns me too," Celeste said gently, like she was trying to be kind, like she was doing Sierra a favor. "Donovan and I are building something together, a real partnership, and we need to move forward without complications." "Complications?" Sierra repeated, the word barely audible. She looked down at the twins in her arms. The boy had Donovan's nose, the girl had Sierra's eyes. "These are your children. Our children." "Children I never agreed to," Donovan said flatly. The room went completely silent. The nurse's mouth opened slightly, shock breaking through her professional composure. Sierra felt like she'd been struck. "What are you talking about? We planned this. You said you wanted a family." "You planned it," Donovan interrupted, his tone sharp and accusatory. "You stopped taking your birth control without telling me. You trapped me, Sierra. My mother warned me you would do something like this when you realized I was outgrowing you." "That's not true." Sierra's voice rose, desperate now, the twins flinching at the sound. "That's not... Donovan, you asked me to get pregnant. You said it was time. You said..." "I said a lot of things to keep the peace," Donovan cut her off again. "But let's be honest. You haven't been a real wife in years. You gave up your career, that research job you loved so much. And for what? To hide in the house, playing around in the basement with test tubes like it was a hobby, while I built an empire?" Sierra's whole body started shaking, not from cold, from something deeper. "You told me to quit," she said, her voice breaking completely now. "Your mother said it made you look weak, like you couldn't provide for your own wife. She said no Mitchell woman works while her husband builds legacy." "And you listened," Donovan said, as if that proved his point. "You gave up without a fight. That told me everything I needed to know about you." Celeste shifted her weight, and Sierra caught it, the small, satisfied smile. The look of a woman who believed she'd already won. "You came from nothing, Sierra," Donovan continued, each word designed to cut. "A single mother in Detroit. Student loans you're probably still paying off. No family name, no connections, no pedigree. I gave you everything, My name, my status, access to a world you never could have touched on your own. And you gave me what? Mediocrity? Dependency? Sierra couldn't breathe. The twins were crying now, softly, as if they could feel their mother falling apart. I loved you, she whispered. Donovan's jaw tightened. Love doesn't build dynasties, he said coldly. Ambition does, vision does, and you have neither. He tapped the envelope again. Sign it. My lawyer already filed everything downtown. This is just a formality. You'll get a settlement, enough to start over somewhere. Appropriate, somewhere that fits who you actually are. I can't even stand up, Sierra said, tears streaming down her face now, hot and fast. Donovan, I just had surgery. I can't. That's not my problem anymore, he said, checking his watch. I have a meeting in 45 minutes. Sign the papers now, or I'll have my attorney serve you officially tomorrow. Either way, this is done. The nurse finally moved, stepping forward slightly. Sir, she said carefully, her voice tight. Your wife just came out of major surgery. She's not in a condition to... Donovan turned his head slowly and looked at the nurse with an expression that made her stop mid-sentence. This is a private family matter, he said quietly. I'd appreciate it if you stayed out of it. The nurse hesitated, looking at Sierra with clear concern. But Sierra shook her head slightly, a tiny, defeated movement that said, Don't fight this for me. I can't protect you too. The nurse stepped back but didn't leave. She stayed by the wall, arms crossed, watching. Celeste spoke again, her voice soft, almost compassionate. It's better this way, Sierra, she said. Clean, no drama, no custody battles. Donovan's being more generous than most men would be. You'll have time to heal, time to figure out what you want to do next. Generous? Sierra's voice came out hollow, broken. She looked at the woman standing beside her husband and saw no guilt, no shame, just calm certainty. Donovan pulled a pen from his jacket pocket and set it on top of the envelope. Last chance, he said. Sign it now and we do this quietly. Fight me and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of woman you really are. Sierra stared at the pen, at the envelope, at the man she'd loved for 8 years, the man whose child she'd carried through hyperemesis so severe she'd been hospitalized twice, the man she'd rearranged her entire life for. Her arms tightened around the twins, her hands still shaking, her body still bleeding beneath the hospital gown. What Donovan didn't know, what Celeste didn't know, what no one standing in that room knew, was this. 6 hours earlier, while Sierra was being wheeled into the operating room, her phone had buzzed with a notification. A single email from her attorney with a subject line that read, Executed. The patent she'd been developing in that basement Donovan mocked, the gene editing process that could cure sickle cell disease, the disease that had killed her baby brother when she was 19 years old, had just been licensed to Vertex Biopharmaceuticals for $1.2 billion and buried in the prenup Donovan had signed 8 years ago, the one his father insisted on to protect Mitchell family assets, the one Donovan bragged about at their rehearsal dinner, the one he never read past the signature page, was a clause Sierra's late research mentor had helped her write, a clause that protected any intellectual property she developed during the marriage, and a penalty clause. If either spouse files for divorce within 60 days of the other spouse signing a major financial contract, the filing spouse forfeits 40% of their personal net worth as liquidated damages. Donovan had just filed. Today. Exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes after the 60-day clock started. But here's what nobody in that room could see. Why was Donovan so desperate to divorce her today? Not last week, not next month, but right now, minutes after she gave birth? Who told him to move this fast, and what did they think they knew? And why was Celeste really there? Just the mistress or the architect of something much darker? If you're watching this without subscribing, you're doing exactly what Donovan did, underestimating the woman who's been 10 steps ahead the whole time. Don't make his mistake. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, what do you think Donovan's about to lose? Sierra's fingers didn't reach for the pen. Instead, they tightened around her babies, holding them closer, feeling their warmth against her chest, the only real thing in a room that suddenly felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Donovan's eyes narrowed. Sierra. Sign it. She looked up at him slowly, her vision blurred by tears, and for just a moment she saw him differently. Not as the man she'd fallen in love with 9 years ago at a medical conference in Boston, not as the man who'd brought her coffee every morning during her residency, not as the man who'd once told her that her mind was the most beautiful thing about her. She saw him as he actually was, a stranger. A man who could look at his own children, minutes old, still struggling to breathe in a world that had just become infinitely colder, and feel nothing. "I need time," she whispered, her voice so soft it barely carried across the bed. "Please, just give me time to think." Donovan laughed. It wasn't warm. It wasn't even cruel. It was empty. "Time? You've had 8 years, Sierra. 8 years to prove you belonged in my world. You failed." Celeste stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the linoleum floor. She placed a manicured hand on Donovan's shoulder, possessive, comfortable, practiced. "Donovan, maybe we should—" "No." He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Sierra. "She needs to understand this is happening whether she accepts it or not. I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling." The twins began to cry harder now, their small bodies trembling. Sierra tried to adjust them, tried to soothe them, but her hands were shaking too badly. The boy, she'd already decided to name him Micah, turned his tiny face toward her chest, searching instinctively for comfort, for food, for safety. The girl, Asha, she'd thought, after her grandmother, whimpered softly, her little fists clenched tight. "Your children are crying," Sierra said, looking directly at Donovan. Don't you feel anything?" He glanced down at the twins for the first time since entering the room. His expression didn't change. "They'll be fine," he said dismissively. "Children are resilient. They won't even remember this." "But I will," Sierra whispered. "Good," Donovan said flatly. "Maybe it'll teach you something about reality." The nurse against the wall shifted uncomfortably, and Sierra caught her eye. The woman looked torn, professionally obligated to stay neutral, but humanly unable to watch this without feeling something. Sierra recognized that look. She'd worn it herself during her years in emergency medicine, watching families tear each other apart over hospital beds. Celeste cleared her throat delicately. "Sierra," she said, her tone shifting to something that might have sounded like sympathy if you didn't listen closely. "I know this is hard, but dragging it out will only make it worse, for everyone, including them." She nodded toward the babies. Sierra felt something cold settle in her chest. Not fear, not even anger yet. Something else. Clarity. "How long?" Sierra asked quietly. Donovan frowned. "How long what? How long have you been planning this?" She looked from him to Celeste and back again. "This timing, it's too precise, too calculated. You didn't just wake up this morning and decide to destroy your family. So how long?" Celeste's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. Donovan's jaw tightened. "That's not relevant," he said. "It is to me." Sierra's voice was stronger now, cutting through the medication fog, cutting through the pain. "You came here with papers already filed. With her." She looked at Celeste. "You came prepared, which means you've been planning this, so I'm asking, how long?" Donovan exhaled sharply, annoyed now. "Does it matter?" "Yes." He stared at her for a long moment, and Sierra saw something flicker across his face. Not guilt, not remorse. Something closer to impatience, like she was wasting his time by asking questions she had no right to ask. 6 months, he said finally. Maybe longer. I don't know. I stopped keeping track of when I stopped caring. 6 months. Sierra's mind raced backward. 6 months ago was June. That was when she'd told him she was pregnant, when she'd made dinner, his favorite, jerk chicken and rice, and waited until after dessert to show him the positive pregnancy test. She'd been terrified he wouldn't be happy. They'd talked about children before, but always in abstract terms. Someday. Eventually. When the time is right. She'd been so relieved when he smiled. When he pulled her into his arms and said, "We're going to be parents." When he kissed her forehead and promised everything would be okay. That night, he'd already been planning to leave her. "You knew," she said, the realization settling over her like ice water. "When I told you I was pregnant, you already knew you were going to do this." Donovan shrugged. "I thought maybe it would change things. Maybe I'd feel something. I didn't." Celeste touched his arm gently, a silent warning to stop talking. But Donovan ignored her. "You want to know the truth, Sierra? I married you because you were safe. Smart, yes. Accomplished, sure. But safe. You didn't come from money so you wouldn't challenge me. You didn't have connections so you wouldn't compete with me. You were grateful just to be noticed. And for a while that worked." He stepped closer to the bed, and Sierra instinctively pulled the twins tighter against her. "But then you got comfortable," Donovan continued. "You stopped trying. Stopped working. Stopped being interesting. You became just another housewife pretending her little science experiments in the basement were meaningful. And I realized I'd made a mistake. Each word landed like a physical blow. Sierra felt them, absorbed them, held them somewhere deep where they burned. So you found someone else, Sierra said quietly, looking at Celeste. I found someone better, Donovan corrected. Someone who understands ambition, someone who doesn't need me to build her life for her because she's already built her own. Celeste smiled, small, tight, victorious. Sierra looked down at her babies. Micah had stopped crying and was sleeping now, his tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Asha was still fussing softly, her eyes squeezed shut against the harsh hospital lights. And in that moment, holding her children while their father stood 3 feet away demanding she sign away her life, Sierra made a decision. She wasn't going to cry anymore. She wasn't going to beg. She wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of watching her break. Okay, she said softly. Donovan blinked, surprised. Okay? I'll sign. Sierra's voice was calm now, steady. But not today. I just had major surgery, Donovan. Your lawyer will have to wait until I'm medically cleared to make legal decisions. That's the law. Donovan's face darkened. You're stalling. I'm recovering, Sierra corrected, from giving birth to your children alone, because you were too busy planning my destruction to be there when they came into the world. The nurse by the wall nodded almost imperceptibly, and Sierra saw it, a tiny moment of solidarity. Donovan opened his mouth to argue, but Celeste placed a hand on his chest. She's right, Celeste said quietly. If she signs now, under duress, immediately post-surgery, her lawyer could challenge it. We need this clean, Donovan, legal, uncontestable. Sierra watched the calculation happen behind Donovan's eyes. He didn't like it, but he couldn't argue with the logic. Fine, he said tersely. You have 48 hours. After that, my attorney files a motion, and this gets ugly, for you. It's already ugly, Sierra said. You just haven't realized how ugly yet. Donovan stared at her, trying to read her expression, trying to find the desperate, broken woman he'd expected. But Sierra's face was blank now, unreadable. He turned abruptly and walked toward the door. Celeste followed, pausing at the threshold to look back one last time. For what it's worth, Celeste said quietly, I hope you land on your feet. Sierra didn't respond. She just watched them leave, the door swinging shut behind them with a soft pneumatic hiss that sounded almost like a sigh. The nurse approached slowly. Are you okay? She asked gently, her eyes full of concern. Sierra looked down at the twins sleeping against her chest, at the envelope still sitting on the tray beside her bed, at the IV drip still feeding medication into her bloodstream. No, Sierra said honestly, but I will be. The nurse nodded, understanding somehow that this wasn't defeat. It was something else, something quieter but infinitely more dangerous. Because what Donovan didn't know, what Celeste didn't know, what even the nurse couldn't know, was that Sierra Mitchell had spent the last 6 months preparing for this exact moment. Not because she'd known it was coming, but because the woman who'd mentored her through graduate school, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo, had taught her one unshakable truth. Always protect your work. Always protect yourself. Because the people who love you today might be the ones who try to destroy you tomorrow. Sierra had listened. She'd protected everything. And now, lying in a hospital bed with her body broken and her heart shattered, she was about to show Donovan Mitchell exactly what it cost to underestimate a woman who'd lost everything except her mind. 3 days later, Sierra sat in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the Morrison and Hayes building in downtown Chicago, wearing a navy blue dress that cost more than Donovan's monthly car payment, though he didn't know that yet. The twins were with her mother in the waiting area outside, sleeping peacefully in their carrier, unaware that their mother was about to dismantle their father's entire world. Across the table sat Donovan, his attorney Marcus Reed, a man with silver hair and a reputation for crushing opposing counsel, and Celeste, who'd apparently decided she had a right to be present at divorce proceedings. Donovan looked relaxed, confident, his suit pressed to perfection, his expression carrying that same dismissive certainty he'd worn in the hospital room. Next to Sierra sat Catherine Osei, 52, a Ghanaian British attorney who specialized in intellectual property and high-stakes divorce litigation. Catherine had flown in from London the morning after Sierra's call, and she sat now with a stack of documents in front of her that looked deceptively thin. Let's make this quick, Donovan said, checking his watch. A new one, Sierra noticed, even more expensive than the last. I have investors coming in at 3. Marcus Reed cleared his throat. My client is prepared to offer Mrs. Mitchell a settlement of $850,000, full custody of the minor children with Mr. Mitchell retaining visitation rights, and a structured payment plan for child support based on his current income. In exchange, Mrs. Mitchell waives all claims to marital property, business assets, and future earnings. Donovan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. It's more than fair, Sierra. Take it and move on. Sierra looked at him for a long moment. She didn't speak. She just looked, and something in her silence made Celeste shift uncomfortably in her seat. Catherine Osei smiled, small, professional, devastating. Mrs. Mitchell will not be accepting that offer, she said calmly. In fact, Mrs. Mitchell will not be accepting any offer because your client has already violated the terms of a prenuptial agreement he signed 8 years ago, and the penalties for that violation are significant. Marcus Reed frowned. What prenup? There's no prenup on file with this marriage. There is, Catherine said. She slid a document across the table. Signed by both parties on August 14, 2016. Witnessed, notarized, legally binding in the state of Illinois. Donovan barely glanced at it. That prenup protects my assets, not hers. She came into this marriage with nothing. There's nothing to protect. That's where you're wrong, Catherine said. She opened the document to page 7 and pointed to a specific clause. Section 12, subsection C. Any intellectual property developed by either party during the marriage remains the sole property of the creator. Furthermore, if either party files for divorce within 60 days of the other party executing a major financial transaction defined as any contract exceeding $100 million in value, the filing party forfeits 40% of their net personal worth as liquidated damages. The room went very quiet. Marcus Reed pulled the document toward him and began reading, his expression shifting from confident to concerned in the space of 3 seconds. Donovan laughed, sharp, dismissive. That's ridiculous. Sierra hasn't executed any major financial transaction. She doesn't even have a bank account I don't monitor. Sierra spoke for the first time since entering the room. Her voice was calm, clear, completely devoid of emotion. You're right. You monitor the bank account with my name on it. The joint account we opened when we got married. The one where my direct deposits used to go before you convinced me to quit my job. She paused, letting that sink in. But you never monitored the account I opened when I was 23. The one that's still in my maiden name. The one connected to Mitchell Biosolutions, LLC, the company I registered 3 years before we met. Donovan's smile faltered. What company? Catherine slid another document across the table. Mitchell Biosolutions, a Delaware LLC established in 2013, solely owned by Sierra Mitchell, formerly Sierra Hayes. For the past 8 years, Mrs. Mitchell has continued her research independently, using her own equipment, her own funding, and her own intellectual labor. The basement laboratory your client so frequently mocked, that's where she developed a gene editing protocol that corrects the mutation responsible for sickle cell disease. Sierra watched Donovan's face. She saw the exact moment understanding began to dawn, slow, terrible, irreversible. On the morning of November 18th, Catherine continued, approximately 6 hours before your client filed for divorce, Mrs. Mitchell executed a licensing agreement with Vertex Biopharmaceuticals. The deal was valued at $1.2 billion, with $400 million paid up front and royalty percentages that will generate substantial ongoing income for the next 20 years. Marcus Reed's face had gone completely pale. He was reading the prenup now with the focused intensity of a man watching his case collapse in real time. That means, Catherine said, her voice taking on a harder edge, your client filed for divorce exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes after the 60-day penalty period began, which means, according to the contract he signed and never bothered to read, Donovan Mitchell now owes Sierra Mitchell 40% of his net worth. She slid a third document across the table. We've had your client's assets independently appraised, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, business interests, vehicles, art collection, everything. His current net worth is approximately $47 million. 40% of that is $18.8 million. The room was so quiet, you could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. Donovan's face had gone from confident to confused to horrified in the span of 30 seconds. That's not possible. You don't have $1.2 billion. You're lying. Catherine pulled out her phone, opened an email, and turned the screen toward him. It was from Vertex Biopharmaceuticals' legal department. Subject line, license agreement executed. Payment confirmed. The first payment hit Mrs. Mitchell's account on November 18th at 9:47 a.m., Catherine said. Your attorney filed divorce papers at 3:52 p.m. that same day. The timeline is documented, time-stamped, and legally unassailable. Celeste had gone very still. She was staring at Sierra now with an expression that wasn't quite fear, but wasn't quite anything else either. Like she was seeing a completely different person than the broken woman crying in a hospital bed 3 days ago. Donovan's hands were shaking. This is a setup. You planned this. I planned nothing, Sierra interrupted, her voice cutting through his panic like a blade. I worked. For 8 years, while you told everyone I was wasting my time in the basement, I was building something that mattered. While your mother called me useless, I was solving a problem that's killed millions of people. While you were planning to leave me, I was creating a legacy that will outlive both of us. She leaned forward slightly, and Donovan actually flinched. You thought I was nothing, Sierra continued. You thought you gave me everything. But the truth is, Donovan, you gave me exactly one thing. Time. Time alone in that basement. Time you didn't monitor because you didn't think I was capable of anything important. And I used every single second of it. Marcus Reed was writing frantically now, trying to find an angle, trying to find a way out. We can challenge this, he said quickly. We can argue the prenup is unconscionable, that the penalty clause is punitive. You can try, Catherine said, but Illinois law is very clear on prenuptial agreements. As long as both parties signed voluntarily, with full disclosure, and with the opportunity to seek independent legal counsel, which they did, the agreement is enforceable. Your client bragged about this prenup at his own rehearsal dinner. He told multiple witnesses it was the smartest thing he'd ever signed. That's going to be very difficult to walk back in court. Donovan looked at Celeste, and Sierra saw it, the first crack in their united front. Celeste was looking at him differently now. Not with love, not with partnership, with calculation, with the cold assessment of a woman who'd just realized the man she'd chosen was about to lose everything. How much did you tell her? Sierra asked suddenly, looking at Celeste. About the divorce, about the timing. Did you know he was planning this for months? Or did he lie to you too? Celeste's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at Donovan, waiting for him to answer. He didn't. He told you I was nothing, didn't he? Sierra continued. He told you I was just a housewife with a hobby. That leaving me would be easy, clean, that I'd take whatever he offered because I had no other options. Celeste's silence was answer enough. Sierra turned back to Donovan. You forgot one thing. You forgot that the woman you married, the one you met at a medical conference, the one who was already published in 3 major journals, the one who had a career before you convinced her to give it up, that woman never actually disappeared. She just got quiet. Catherine placed one final document on the table. Mrs. Mitchell is prepared to offer your client a counterproposal. He can accept the prenup penalties as written, $18.8 million paid within 90 days, or he can contest it in court, which will trigger additional clauses including full financial disclosure, public proceedings, and Mrs. Mitchell's right to pursue additional damages for emotional distress, coercion, and abandonment. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. We have documentation of everything that happened in that hospital room. The nurse filed an incident report. We have testimony. We have medical records showing Mrs. Mitchell was served divorce papers less than an hour after major surgery. That's not going to look good to a judge, Mr. Mitchell. That's not going to look good to anyone. Donovan was breathing hard now, his face flushed, his hands gripping the edge of the table like he might flip it over. You can't do this, he said, his voice shaking. You can't just... I built everything. My company, my reputation, Your empire, Sierra finished. The one you built while I stayed home like you asked, while I gave up my career like your mother demanded, while I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. She stood up slowly, and even though her body still ached from the surgery, even though she'd barely slept in 3 days, she stood tall. I'm not taking anything from you, Donovan, she said quietly. I'm just collecting what you already owed. You signed that contract. You made those promises. You broke them. These are just consequences. She picked up her bag, and Catherine gathered the documents. You have 48 hours to accept or reject the settlement offer, Catherine said to Marcus Reed. After that, we file in court, and this becomes public. I'll let you advise your client accordingly. Sierra walked toward the door, and then stopped. She turned back one last time. By the way, she said, looking directly at Donovan, the twins are doing beautifully. Micah smiled yesterday. Asha is already trying to hold her head up. They're strong, resilient. They got that from me, not you. She left the room without waiting for a response, Catherine following close behind. In the hallway, her mother was waiting with the twins, both awake now, looking up at her with dark, curious eyes. Sierra picked them up, one in each arm, feeling their weight, their warmth, their absolute trust that she would keep them safe. And for the first time in 3 days, she smiled. Because Donovan Mitchell had tried to destroy her at her weakest moment, and instead, he'd destroyed himself. He'd filed for divorce thinking she had nothing, not knowing she had everything. He'd walked into that hospital room with power and walked out with none. And now, the whole world was about to learn exactly what it cost to underestimate a woman who'd spent 8 years building something that mattered while everyone around her wasn't paying attention. 6 weeks later, the settlement was finalized. Donovan paid the $18.8 million. His real estate company took a massive hit when investors learned about the divorce and the circumstances surrounding it. Celeste left him 2 weeks after the conference room meeting. Apparently, ambition recognized a sinking ship when it saw one. Sierra used part of the settlement to establish the Marcus Hayes Foundation, named after her brother, funding sickle cell research and providing financial assistance to families affected by the disease. She bought a house in Oak Park with a real laboratory in the basement, not a converted storage space, but a state-of-the-art facility where she could continue her work. And every night she put her twins to bed, kissed their foreheads, and whispered the same words. You are loved, you are safe, and you will never have to make yourself smaller for anyone. Donovan Mitchell learned a lesson he should have learned years earlier. Never underestimate the woman who stays quiet. Because sometimes silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's just focus. And sometimes the woman you thought had nothing was just waiting for the right moment to show you exactly who she'd been all along. Dear viewers, thank you for being here. If you've made it this far without subscribing, you're missing out on stories that will move you, inspire you, and remind you that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient. Hit that subscribe button right now, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? And what would you have done in Sierra's position? Your voice matters here. Subscribe, comment, and be part of this community. We'll see you in the next one.